Hey, Chris. How are you? Hey, Curtis, how are you?
Melvyn, I'm good, man. How are you? Can you hear me?
Oh, good, thank you. Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Okay, great. Cool. I wasn't sure. I was just listening in on the boots now. So, um, yeah, should be fun, man. Should be fun. A bit tired, but here we go.
Hey, guys.
Hey, Chris. How you doing?
Good. How are you guys?
Yeah, all right. Thank you. Yourself?
Sorry, I'm just rolling off the other conversation, and
yeah, I was watching that one. It's pretty interesting.
Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, no, it was good. It was good. Some very interesting stuff happening across the continent.
Yeah, it's a interesting group of people. Actually, really impressive. It's a little bit intimidating being on the same panel, right?
I feel the exact same way about this, man. It's like, what?
No, I've spent quite some time digesting your guys' bios, and it's a very impressive group as well. So I think you'll be good.
I saw a declined email from, I don't know if you saw it or had time to look at it.
Yes, I did see it.
Okay, cool. So I think there's like, what, one more person we're waiting for?
Yep. So we're waiting for, I believe, Mumamba, and Munyaradzi as well should be joining.
Okay, cool.
So I'll give it probably another minute, and then we should get started. It looks like we have quite a few people joining us already.
Hundreds.
Okay, given that we've hit 60 viewers at this point, I'm going to go ahead and kick off and not keep everybody waiting in silence. So welcome, hello everyone. Thank you for joining our first ever African Renaissance virtual conference, and welcome to the session on building hard businesses in Africa. My name is Chileshe, and I'll be your host and moderator for the hour. Today, we have an exciting group of really accomplished business leaders to help shed light on what it takes to build and operate hard businesses in Africa. Oftentimes, our fear of the unknown can paralyze us from getting started on a vision that we want to pursue. So from this session, we want to try and address those fears by learning from those who have paved a path of success for us. So we want to encourage future builders to build without fear. So let's introduce our panelists of Trailblazers. So far, we have two panelists joining us, and we're hoping that the others will join shortly as well. With here. It looks like Mumamba just joined.
Hello.
You didn't miss much. Thanks for joining. We're just about to kick off a round of introductions, but first I'm going to just read a little bit about your guys' bios. So first, starting with Curtis. Curtis is a director of Sea Pride Foods, with operations in both Namibia, Zimbabwe, and Zambia, and they boast an impressive portfolio of food products. Before his current role, Curtis also worked as sales and strategic business development leader for Tricon in Zambia. And then we have Melvyn Lubega. He's also a director at Go1 and Forbes 30 Under 30 list maker. Go1 is a corporate e-learning platform whose goal is to make learning easy. Amongst their clients, they count Delta Airlines, University of Oxford, and NBC Universal, just to name a few, as if that weren't impressive enough by itself. And then we have Mumamba Mwansa, who is the CEO of Innovative Mining and previously head of real estate investment at Tebo Investments, where he worked to advance the mandate of building the Nkwashi Charter City. Innovative Mining is a mining startup with exploration operations underway in Luapula, Zambia. So as the other panelists come on, I'll introduce them as well. I think we're just waiting for one more. But I wanted to kick off and maybe just let each of you, in order of that introduction, go ahead and say a little bit more about yourselves. Curtis, you want to start, and then we'll go with Melvyn and Mumamba.
Yeah, just to keep it brief. So I'm Zambian born and bred, and studied here, and then spent a bit of time in the UK and South Africa to complete my studies. I worked for an asset management firm based out of Cape Town. I moved back to Zambia in 2014 to join Tricon, which you've heard, and with a very much a family business, and with a mandate to kind of grow it in the food distribution realm. That kind of led on to us partnering up with our current business partners they're a company based out of Namibia called Deep Catch, which we started a joint venture with them in 2017. So if you like, the founding director for CPIDE Zambia. We're a small to medium-sized entity that services clients across the region, predominantly focusing on Zambia. We do a bit of export and get involved in that. And we have the same business, as you rightfully said, in Namibia, Zimbabwe, and also South Africa. And that's me.
Melvyn?
No, and thank you very much, Chris, for introducing us and looking forward to the panel ahead. So Melvyn Lubega, Ugandan by origin, but grew up in South Africa. Background in actuarial science, so did University of Cape Town actuarial science there. Then worked briefly for Goldman Sachs in London, so investment banking. Then came back and joined the Boston Consulting Group, so a management consulting firm, as their first associate in Africa, probably a number of years back. It was during that time, got the initial thinking and idea for what became Go One in the end. So I was fortunate to get a scholarship to Oxford University, did a double master's there, with my second master's focusing on human capital development with technology. And off the back of that, met one of my co-founders, also a Rhodes Scholar. And I guess since over the last 5 years in building out Go One, so I did a program called Y Combinator, like incubator in Silicon Valley. And off the back of that, in 2015, began to build out the business. And so scaled out the teams first in the US, then Australia, then the UK, then opened up a more outpost in Malaysia, then Vietnam, and then really doubled down more so across the continent as well. So it's been a hybrid where roots on the continent, but also roots flying back into the continent. And so now probably the world's largest corporate training library by numbers, service clients in about 24 countries, offices in about 8.
Awesome, thank you. Mumamba?
Hey guys, I hope you can hear me well. Sorry, I didn't get the chance to do an audio test.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Perfect. So I guess maybe to start from the beginning. Also born and bred in Zambia. Actually know Curtis from a past life as well. Did my schooling in SA as well. Though I wasn't in Cape Town. I was in a little town called Grahamstown. So I went to school in Rhodes University, then came back to Zambia. And as you guys all know, it's always nice settling back into the country and just, starting to feel like because of the difference between maybe where you were for school and then coming back, and I was there for 6 years, give or take. Just started feeling like it felt like there was so much opportunity. I couldn't quite, figure out how to start tapping into it. But anyway, to begin with, I guess work experience was important. So, started out in a small venture capital outfit here, called Minwood Venture Capital. Was there for a little over 6 months before joining Tebe Investment Management and working on the Nkwashi project, which I was part of for almost 4 years, give or take. Great experience. I think Muya in the opening session spoke a bit towards that. And then sometime... Sorry, I'm getting some feedback there. And then around just before the 4-year mark, decided to sort of branch out, and there's where the innovative mining story sort of started, which was about 2018. It's been about 2 years since then in the mining space. And I guess we can talk about that a bit later. Yeah.
Thank you for those introductions. The first question for the panel is, what does it take to build technically complex businesses in Africa? You're all in industries that require high degree of either technicality for the services that you provide or the products that you provide. And can you talk a little bit about what kind of challenges can be expected and what you expect to see there? Maybe we'll start with, in reverse order, we'll start with Mumamba, and then we'll go to Melvyn and then Curtis.
Okay, maybe to start us off, I think for me, one of the things that has become very, very clear is the need for some sort of level, a minimum level of technical knowledge. And I guess that comes from the fact that I didn't study mining or mining engineering or geology, even though I find myself in the business. And it became very clear how just certain minimum knowledge requirements that I needed before going into it. So spent quite a bit of time before and even after getting into innovative mining, and it's a constant learning experience. But getting to know what it takes to, I mean, at the end of the day, you're getting rock out of the ground, right? But it's once you get into it, you realize, okay, it's not as easy as it sounds. From what rock you're getting, how you're getting it out, what you do with it, where you take it, etc. And it becomes so important to know what those things are. And I guess aside from just the know-how, there's the sort of hidden, I won't call them a hidden information about a technical business, from hidden costs associated with the business. You could come up with a financial projection of how things ideally go, but it's only until you really do your homework and dive into it, do you find out, a lot of hidden costs associated from, hidden taxes that no one really talks about. But, if you're going to do your business properly, these things have to be paid. And if you don't, you're followed. To just maybe things like small cartels that, are in that industry, and that you sort of need to figure out how to work around. Maybe in my case, a lot of price sensitivity and price disparity between local pricing and international pricing, and some of it controlled. So that sort of information, I think, is what I've found as one of the more interesting and technically important aspects of running such a business. Maybe I'll leave it to the rest to add on.
All right, thanks, Mumamba. I'm just going to take a quick second to introduce our final panelist, Dr. Gwatidzo. He's the CEO of Astromobile Africa. One of his goals is to make technology a right and not a privilege. Astromobile sells over 4 million phones a year throughout Africa, and they strive to make a $20 phone have the same feature parity as a $500 device. So welcome, Munya. Thank you for joining the panelists. We just gave our first question, which is, how do you build, or what does it take to build technically complex businesses in Africa? And what are some of the challenges you can expect to face? I'm going to kick off to Melvyn, follow up with Curtis, and then you can jump in yourself, Munya.
Yeah, and
okay, thank you.
No, Munya, thank you for joining the conversation. Just to build off what Mumamba was saying, I think in addition to some of the elements around just having a sense of the technical understanding of what you're trying to build, I think all businesses are difficult to build. But I think when you're thinking of a technically complex business, I think there are two things that particularly come to mind when I think about them. And one is having grit and resilience. I think the reality is when you are charting the course, it's not as if you are going to wake up one day, go in the corner, sell something, someone's going to buy it from you, and that's it. And I think whilst, risk return, the reality is by doing the hard thing, you hopefully will get greater returns. But you have to make sure you have that level of resilience to go through, because the reality is often in many of the places you find yourself in, you may not necessarily, find the skill set in the market of someone who's been there and done that. You may be a pioneer in your space. And so people will look around and say you're going to fail, but you can't blame them because they wouldn't know any better based on their exposure. And so that grit's quite important. But in the same vein, I think there's also a good sense of being okay with uncertainty. I think particularly, even though, look, all of us here sound like we could model good numbers, understand our businesses, but when you're building things that are technically hard or just general business, what you do find is a high level of uncertainty. You need to be comfortable to not only with the uncertainty, but also I think to Mumba's point, the importance of willingness to learn and just being a lifelong learner. I think often as an entrepreneur, particularly as a founder, you may find that everyone will look to you for the answers. And I think it's a point to appreciate, particularly when you're building a technically complex business, that you may not necessarily have all the answers. And with that comes the final piece, which is, I think, humility in relation to not being afraid to ask those who may know more than you, whether it is elders, people from abroad, someone who's been there and done that. And I think those are three things that one needs to possibly think through in terms of thinking through how one considers a technically complex business.
Those are some great points. Curtis, you want to jump in?
Briefly, I think, just to add on what Mumamba and Melvyn have said, I think for me, one of the biggest challenges I faced is finding the right people who fit your team or fit the way you're trying to go. And that's not just, I think for any entrepreneur in Africa, the margin for error is often is very small and not so forgiving. And basically, all of us tend to, you can't do it alone, and having the right people on your side or in your team with you who are the right fit, who are pulling in the right direction, who are helping you to deliver your product or service to your clients in the right way, the way you visioned and envisioned it, is super critical. And sometimes finding those people is difficult. And it shouldn't be, but it is. And I think to build a technically, whatever business, it relies on having the right team or the right set of skills or the right people in place. And you can do things with computers, you can do things with technology, you can do things with the internet. It's all well and good, but you need people behind all of that to make sure that it's all working. So for me, I'd say, the team aspect is a big challenge in our environment, and it shouldn't be, because there's so many great and wonderful people available across the country, across the region, across the continent, but we kind of have a very maybe rigid or old school way of thinking about work in the sense that it needs to be done in a physical brick and mortar place, when, with technology as advanced as it is nowadays, we should be thinking beyond that paradigm. I'll leave it there.
Awesome. Yeah, I think, Africa being, having such a young population, to Melvin's point and to your point as well, it can be very, very difficult to find experience in areas where you're looking for technical expertise. And so external sources of that can be critical, but having the right people that are willing to be those lifelong learners is fundamental to that. Munya, do you want to add on to that as well? What are some of the challenges you've faced about building a technically complex business in Africa, and what challenges can people expect to come across?
I think I would like to agree with what Katie said. I think the major challenge, that you're likely to face in terms of a complex business is talent. There is not so much, talent in Africa, which is trained to be able to adapt to the new type of business that you are likely to be facing now. So building a team becomes, a challenge, because you have to train the people. You're not likely to get people that are already trained, because, Africa kind of like caught up late to the new type of businesses that are happening now. So that is a big challenge that, you would likely to face. And if you're to get international talent to be able to close those gaps, you would then find that, it would push your cost of labor very, very high. Then also the other issue is infrastructure. There isn't adequate infrastructure to support, technically complex businesses. Let's talk about, access to internet. You'd find out that most areas, they don't have reliable internet connectivity. In most parts of Africa, fiber is very limited. Most of the people rely on broadband, which is typically very expensive and not reliable. So for you to be able to drive such kind of businesses, you need proper infrastructure, you need proper connectivity, and you then find out that makes it very, very difficult for you to be able to run a business that is technically competent. Then also the other thing that I would like to talk about is, for any business that has got, a global scale, it requires a lot of money, a lot of investment, a lot of capital for you to be able to drive that. And, it comes with that as well, that, most startups in Africa that wants to drive these kind of businesses, they have challenges in terms of raising capital. Because you need to attract the right people, you need to attract the right resources, and I've seen a lot of startups, companies really facing a lot of challenges in terms of raising the right amount of capital. That is, if they've even managed to raise any capital at all. So you would find out that people have to build businesses from their savings or from families or from loans that they can get, but those are very, very much limited. So to me, those are the three key factors that I see really, really, affecting one to build, a technically complex business in Africa. So, those issues have to be addressed. We have to find a way of how we can make access to capital much easier, a way in terms of how we can expedite infrastructure deployment in Africa, and a way how we can also train our own resources in the relevant, skills. I think it will go into the curriculum in our universities. It has to change. I think you look at most universities, what they are teaching at universities, it's curriculum that has been set 15, 20 years ago. And you find out that curriculum is no longer relevant at all. So people are just going, to college, for the sake of it, but they don't have relevant skills that can actually help to assist the current challenges that we are facing, or the current skills that are needed to drive a 21st, modern business. So for me, I think, I would like to say those are the critical points that I think, they really make it difficult for one to drive, such kind of a business in Africa.
Yeah, and there's a common thread. One thing that I like the most about these comments is the fact that Munya, you brought up the issue of capital as your third and final challenge, but thematically speaking, the challenges are actually non-financial related, right? A lot of talk around grit and tenacity and the technical know-how. A lot of it about being a lifelong learner and having the humility to ask. And then training and finding the right people. The common thread I would say around that is really around the skill set, the technical skill sets, right? Being able to double down and figure out how to get people the right amount of learning and the right amount of opportunity to find learning, learning grounds for them to level up in their skills. So the next question that I kind of want to ask is, what can be done to have more people building hard businesses? How can we smooth the path for future entrepreneurs? Melvyn, your business Go One, it's a corporate e-learning platform. I think that's huge in this, in sort of answering this question, in providing the ability for people to do their best work through giving them the right structures to level up their skills. Maybe we'll start with you for the panel, and then I'll repeat the question again. What can we do to help more people build hard businesses, and how can we smooth that path for them?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting how the conversation, I think even the comments have come back to the point around talent. And so something which I want to speak to in my answer, but I think when it comes down to building a technically complex business, or any business for that matter, I think it's the skill set, it's about developing the skill set that one is able to take something very complex and break it down. So you can think about our business where we partner with leading training providers like content creators and then we also take their content, put it on our platform. We work with distribution partners as well as we also have clients. So the ecosystem can get very messy. But the question is, same way when you think of when Uber began. When Uber began, their challenge wasn't thinking through, how do I get drivers onto the platform? In the outset of Uber, they actually just hired their own drivers and said, look, let's control for the driver experience and let's just rather focus on getting customers into the platform. Once there were enough riders, they then said, fine, let's get the driver ecosystem. Then they worked on partner ecosystems. And I think it's trying to break down a complex problem or complex business into parts so you actually focus on testing the right hypotheses within your business. And so I think that's something which particularly you find very smart entrepreneurs struggle to do in terms of breaking it down. But I think often, directly to your question though, it's a function of showing that it can be done and it can be done locally. I think many people assume that you can't build the next X from Africa. Yet what I love, if you read a book called Startup Nation, which essentially speaks to the tech revolution in Israel. Again, Israel is a small state. I mean, the human capital is not any stronger than ours. But it's that ambition of when you build, don't build for your neighbor, your community, build for the world. And something which I came to appreciate, particularly quite early in our journey with Go One, was it takes the same amount of energy to do something small as it does to do something big or complex. So you might as well do something complex in any case, because all of us are the same hours in the day. Whether you're CEO of a $1 million company, $100 million company, you will still be up at night thinking about the future of the business. And so I think it's about that ambition and knowing people out there can do it within your community. And that's why I think forums like this are important, because the reality is you're hearing from, look, I'm thinking at the caliber of some of the guys on this panel who actually are living it day in, day out, showing that is possible. And so that's a key one for me. I think just to the point I was asked on the panel, whilst I have the proverbial conch, as it were, I think when you think about talent in Africa, it's an interesting point where the basis of our business, my first experience was I used to be a very active venture capital investor. And many of the small businesses I used to invest in told me they weren't big enough to invest in their people. They'll learn on the job. Yet when I worked in management consulting, some of the biggest companies on the continent, they were often not getting human capital development right. And I think there's a fine line there where I think organizations, particularly leaders in businesses, need to put more attention towards human capital development. And for example, you think about when anyone gets hired for a job, what you typically do is you put together a role description of what you want the person to do and what they must have as skills. You then get CVs, you then say, fine, these are the top 5 candidates, we'll shortlist them, we'll interview them. And then from those 5, you'll pick the top one you want. But no company, startup, big or small, goes back and says, when we hired you for the job, you were the top candidate, but actually you only had 80% of those skills. How do we upskill you for the remaining 20%? Everyone just assumes because they're the best person in the crop that they're fit for the job. And so I think there's something to be said around getting a culture of learning and development and not assuming that people learn on the job. And I think it's tough on the content because people often feel it's a point of ego, as if when you're being offered training, it means you're deficient. No, it means we're investing in you to succeed. I think that narrative needs to change in terms of human capital development across the world, but particularly on the continent.
That's great. Yeah, I think, even in my own business, I found that to be true. You have people that come at your doorstep and are looking for a job, and they may not necessarily have all the skills, but it's worth that investment. You find that over time, they do have the ability and the capacity to level up. Even looking at counterparts, the US has seen mass migration where they're importing a lot of talent and a lot of African talent. Some of those people coming from Africa have not had the same level of training as their peers, but yet they have the ability to sort of compete and be present in that same workforce and succeed as well. So it speaks to sort of the power we would have if we did more human capital investment. So I really love that point. I want to give the floor to Mumamba to kind of comment on what can we do to build more hard businesses? How can we smooth the path for future entrepreneurs?
I think my first point is to agree with Melvyn. I think if we're going to smooth the path, we have to make the path. So trailblazing is important. It's easier to walk down a footpath than to walk through a bush. So after you guys as the trailblazers walk through, you've already started doing something that helps the next entrepreneur try it out. And Shradon, I think recording is important. So you do what you're doing in in many instances, because of our context, you might be the first person doing that. To keep a record becomes very important. Okay, what went well, what didn't go well, which is a lot of stuff, as you guys all know. But because of those things, if there's a record and that can be referenced, and I hope it's not too academic in thinking, but it then allows you to build upon it, so that if what we've done, for example, is made a stone circular wheel, the next day I look at it and say, oh, let's do rubber, and it becomes a little easier in that sense. And I think maybe another thing that sort of comes to mind for me is, in as much as we have the fields that we are in specifically, there's a lot of sort of cross applicable knowledge. So because of what our experience individually may have been in our efforts to push forward our businesses, you'll find that, if I take a look at what Melvyn's doing, I may have no idea technically maybe about the intricacies of the business, but one of the challenges I may have faced may give me a different point of view to whatever challenges he's facing, and that may be useful. And I think it's especially important where we have the opportunity to either mentor someone or just answer a question asked. How would you handle situations such as this? I think to sort of step out of our comfort zones and look into a business and industry that isn't our own, I think is one way to be encouraging in that sense as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think a lot of times it's easy to get tunnel visioned and remain focused in your industry and forget that there's learnings to be had even about your own business in industries completely polar opposite to your own. So that's a very salient point. I also love the comment you made: easier to walk down a footpath than to walk through a bush. I'm gonna steal that one and tweet it later. Curtis, can you go ahead and comment as well on building hard business and how we can smooth the path for future entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think great points by both Melvyn and Mumamba. And if I maybe just can add on on top of that, I think there's, from my experience especially, we need to adapt an attitude of doing. I think, we tend, and I say we as Africans, we tend to get caught up all the time in meetings about the meetings that you had about meetings, and there's very little doing that happens. Just do it. Sometimes that's what you need to do to get it done, is you just do it. So that basically is, you need to be willing to take that risk, and just, almost it needs to be made in a way that even if you do fail, at least you tried and failed, as opposed to not trying at all. I think that's something that I've always tried to live by, and it's something that I would like to pass on to whoever is listening. Maybe it might help somebody. I think kind of from a bigger perspective, or more macro perspective, there is a certain element around the sort of environment, and that being, the policies in place by governments to encourage entrepreneurship, incentives that are in place for small businesses. We've touched on, I think Munya spoke about access to capital in his opening comments. There's no kind of, or very little rather, governance for small businesses available. I know in Zambia, where I'm from, and there's no kind of incubation or hubs that you can access, or very little, where you can go and seek advice on something that you are struggling with as an entrepreneur, or even just it's kind of just dependent on your network and who you have access to. That will also kind of limit what information you get. I think one of the big inherent risks in Africa, and this is linking to the point about that Mumamba made about recording stuff, is we don't have enough data on various aspects, on various issues. If you want to look up, certain metrics, etc., there's just not enough available in your particular region, across the area. And I think recording that becomes super critical, because that eliminates or gets rid of risk. The more we can document what we're doing, and good or bad, the more it makes our continent more transparent for Joe Blogs in Tanzania that wants to set up, a fabric manufacturing business out of Sisal or whatever it is, and that's where we need to really sharpen our tools or sharpen up on. I think that's basically it. We need the ability for entrepreneurs to envision from the concept through to actualization. There needs to be kind of some steps that they can follow, or if they don't know how to do that, they need to know where to go to get that information.
Yeah, so that's twice now I've heard access to information. I think Mumamba, again, building off his comment to say recording and documenting, and then your comment around leveraging other people's data or other people's learnings, I think is super critical. Also, one of the points that you raised around getting caught up in meetings and adapting an attitude of doing is something that I think resonates really strongly with me, because it speaks to our culture in some ways of not all, when you get a job, I think traditionally, especially coming from sort of a colonial mindset, you're just expected to receive instruction and perform that instruction. And so, even in the way that we teach, Munya commented on this as well, we teach in a very sort of old school way. It's not for the 21st century. And so people aren't being encouraged to take initiative, and they're waiting for instruction, and it's very sort of procedural. And so changing that mindset is important. Munya, do you want to add to that as well? How can we have more people building hard businesses, and how can we smooth that path for future entrepreneurs?
I think it, when you look at Africa, you then find out that these are really driven by SMEs, by small businesses. So I want to believe that the only way to be able to grow that is to find support systems that are able to grow our SME systems. Because I believe that we have to grow hard businesses from the bottom. We have to start from the SMEs, the small miners, the small guys that are doing food processing. But you find out that these guys are doing it in small clusters. They are doing it at the back of their yards. They are doing it in their houses, and they are doing mining small little mines. The issue is then to find a way of how we can capacitate those people, to be able to grow them to the next levels. So I think there has to be a very strong support system for SMEs. You can look at the example of China. China, was built by small companies. It's those small little companies that then ventured into very big corporates that are, extracting tons and tons of different minerals and different products. But it's that ability to be able to walk the journey with these small companies, support them, be it with information, training. We need to develop a lot of, information centers in terms of making sure that there is readily available information for these SMEs. Because right now, what we've seen in Africa, there's a lot of talk about supporting SMEs, but there's nothing that is really happening on the ground that is really tangible to be able to grow this market. The attention is always put to say, okay, let's bring big investment into Africa so that we have big corporations, but we are always ignoring these small little entrepreneurs that are driving our economies. In most African countries, 60% of the economies are driven by SMEs and the people that are, labeled informal. And these are the people that are driving that. So for me, the future is about growing and capacitating, these small businesses and we grow them to bigger businesses. So we need to, create a culture of continuous learning where we keep on passing knowledge and documenting knowledge and invest in practical skills. Especially in our education system, we need to train more in terms of practical skills rather than theory-based curriculums. There has to be a lot of training centers that are supposed to be put around so that we capacitate these upcoming businesses. Because I believe that's where the future, of this type of business is going to come from. It's those small businesses that need to be capacitated to be able to grow.
Yeah, and the comment around, there was a comment earlier, I believe it was Melvyn, who said, grit and tenacity is just as important as the technical know-how. You have to be resilient in your resolve to kind of achieve certain things. And I think the linkage between that and what you're saying is the SMEs, the ones that are doing the small scale mining, they are the ones with the tenacity, right? They are the ones that are bootstrapping, and they are the ones with the grit. And so given the opportunity and given the learning platforms that we've, talked about, imagine giving Go1 to some of those and having that platform host a wealth of knowledge that's being learned from all across the continent. I think that's a very, very powerful thing to be able to kind of push to get exactly the agenda you're pushing, which is let's have these SMEs empowered with the knowledge of someone who's gone before them to actually create and scale their businesses more effectively. And so I want to kind of lead into another topic here. So one of the things that I'm very curious about is in the context of building hard businesses in Africa, what are some of the challenges that you faced that you don't think you would have faced, or someone appear to you in a different country or continent would have had to face? So what is it about? What is a Africa-specific challenge that you faced about building your specific company? And I'll start with you, Munya, just speaking about Astromobile and some of the things that you're working on now.
I think there is a lot of challenges building a business in Africa. I think the first thing is the legislation itself. You don't have proper legislation that are there to be able to support one to be able to grow the business. It's always very bureaucratic for one to set up a business, and you have to go through a lot of processes for you to be able to do what you want to be able to do. I think it all goes back to one of the biggest problems that Africa suffers from, which is corruption. Corruption pretty much makes business very difficult in Africa because simple processes that needs to be done, there is someone who's standing in your way, who's deliberately delaying the process because they want you to pay them money. And I think it's one thing that we need to deal with. You want to expand and go into other African countries. You don't get the permits, you don't get the licensing, not because it's complex, but because of corruption. So to me, corruption is the biggest challenge. I thought it was only in Zimbabwe, until we started expanding into other African countries. You actually then discover that each and every country that you're going to, it's even worse than the other countries that you thought that, it was corrupt. So I think there has to be a way that we need to create a smooth environment that enables business without corruption, without unnecessary bureaucratic processes that are put to facilitate and feed the corruption system in Africa. To me, I think that is one of the biggest challenges. It blocks investment into Africa because there is no accountability, of those resources that are being channeled into Africa. So for me, corruption, is one thing that I've battled with. It's something that is supposed to take a month or 2 months. It ends up taking you 3 months, 3 years to be able to do. I think in one of the countries, we wanted to set up a local manufacturing factory for mobile devices. It took us 4 years to be able to do that. We eventually failed to even do that after investing in terms of equipment and everything in that country, because there is so much bureaucracy. But what is then happening? It's 2,000 people that could have been employed. It's 10,000 people that could have benefited from that value system. But because we did not accept to give anyone money, the project was halted. So to me, it's those big challenges that we are facing each and every day, and you have to put twice the effort, to run a business, which is different from the developed countries. It's the policies are clear. If you want to do something, the steps and policies are clear that needs to be followed, and if you follow them, things happen. So, but in Africa, it's very challenging. I don't know, from the other panelists, maybe it's different from other countries, but to me, I think that is the major hurdle that we need to deal, because it's what's blocking investment into Africa. It's what blocking generation of new leaders that are able to do new things that can help. It's really the upcoming businesses to be able to do well. Everything stems on corruption.
Yeah, there was actually, as soon as you said corruption, there was sort of synchronized head nodding, like we're all listening to the same music. I think we can all very much relate to that. Myself, again, in my own business, I faced this where I actually refused to do government contracts because it always involves a brown paper envelope, as they like to call it. And so that can stifle your own growth, because your own government won't support your business unless you are paying some of the people in your way to just give you an opportunity, and that's all you need, just the opportunity. So that's an extremely important point to raise, and I think it's something that definitely deserves more conversation on how we root that out. So I'm going to go to Curtis and ask you to kind of comment on that as well. What are specific challenges you faced in your business and in what you do that you don't think your peers would have to face, and it's because of starting a business in Africa? What are specific challenges to Africa that you think your peers don't have to face?
Yeah, I think, my business is very much concentrated around food distribution and maintaining cold chain supply. So that is definitely something obvious, but I would say obvious, but if I asked somebody in Europe if they had that challenge, it would be like, nah, man. It's like, you know what I mean? So I think also a cash versus a credit economy. We in Africa, we have very much cash-based economies, which can often stifle growth. We as a business extend a bit of credit to our clients, and sometimes it comes and hurt us, because then you get stretched, and that can be, as a startup or as a small business can mean you're. So you need to manage your cash flow very, 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 very tightly. And if it means sometimes you need to turn away business, then you need to do what you need to do. I think in addition to that, kind of just I think you have to always have your end goal in sight and or know where it is that you are wanting to go. I think you get so bogged down with, especially as a startup, with trying to do everything that because you're constrained for time, resources, etc. You normally start off as a really small team, that you can kind of lose sight of the end goal, of why it is that you get. You started off initially. I think you spoke and you referred to it as that tunnel vision scenario. And I think kind of everybody was nodding, because we've all been in that space where you kind of forget that you need to take a step back as a leader in that business to be able to say, actually, you know what, are we going down the right path? So just constantly, rechecking that. So that's maybe more on the softer side. But yeah, those are my comments. Not much, but yeah.
No, yeah, I think your comment about the cash versus credit economy and stifling your growth is important because it actually speaks to the rule of law issue that Munya was sort of alluding to, right? It's very hard to hold people accountable when you have weak systems of justice, right? So even being able to follow up and chase a supplier or a creditor can be difficult if you don't have those systems in place. So maybe that's another one we can add to the list, just strengthening the rule of law around, credit capabilities and being able to.
Absolutely. And even having credit bureaus that actually are doing their job properly and you can get credible information from them is super key. I think, especially we don't really have, it's maybe a lot better in some other countries like South Africa and I think Kenya. They've got quite strong credit bureau agencies that can give you some sort of indication of whether a client or supplier is a creditworthy applicant for. So I think we have I think it's Zambia something similar, but I'm not so sure how up to date or who subscribes to it or not. So I mean I'm always looking out for some more information on that, but that links to exactly that.
Yeah, it would be great to be able to also carry that across countries throughout the continent, actually, because you have to reset up all that infrastructure with every country you want to expand to, which can be difficult. So I want to give the floor to Mumamba to comment on this as well, specific challenges to running your business in Africa that you don't think your peers have to face. So far, we've got load shedding and corruption.
Yeah, pretty much takes the cake there. I think maybe to add one, I don't know if it's maybe an African one, and it's great that we've got a bit of a mix in the group. But one that I've seen particularly because of where, for example, my operations are, very, very rural place. And so just I have to do a lot of let me call it community engagement and dealing and working with the locals and hiring locals on short-term basis and that sort of thing. And when things go well, there's no issues and everything. But if things go bad, it becomes a traditional religion issue. There's this spiritual matters associated with why things aren't happening. Someone hasn't done something. So managing those, the motivations behind, how motivated rather people are becomes very interesting. It's a unique sort of situation, I think, in that sense, because when things go bad, you're dealing with, people's sort of cultural beliefs. Okay, guys, things are tough. We're going through a tough spurt, but let's work hard. Things will work out. But the general feeling from maybe the people on the ground is, no, what we actually need to do is there's a guy, down the road behind that tree, et cetera, who we need to go talk to. Now, this guy is going to make it such that the spirits will allow business to work well. And I feel like that might be a unique one. But it's something I actually deal with quite regularly. And having to just, draw a line and say, okay, guys, business is business. There's good days, there's bad days, and we can work out a strategy to deal with the bad days. But I think that's an interesting one.
Can I ask you to
I've also had
click on that point. Is that primarily from workers, or is it primarily from the leaders? Sort of like for example, in Zambia, you have a lot of chiefs in the rural areas, right? So you're primarily dealing with the chiefs. Is that resistance coming from the chiefs, or is it from the people you're employing in the mines?
Mainly from the people we're employing. At least the chiefs I've had to deal with are fairly well educated. No, actually, they're quite well educated. At least the senior chiefs. Maybe at the headman level and sub chief, you will have to deal with some of that. but it's mainly with the workers, and so at least it's not it's something that's sort of in-house a lot of the time. But there is, for example, like I said, there's a lot of engagement that has to be had with, let's say, the local headman, and if things are tough, the workers will, be keeping the headman up to date about how things are going in the business, and the headman will come and offer some advice. No, I think you should do this. I've heard that there are a few struggles, so it's quite interesting, I guess. And then just to echo both Munya and Curtis's points on firstly on the corruption side, it's real. In terms of firstly process, because for example, there are some sites I'll have to we'll work at that have maybe a 9-month commercial viability, right? And then you'll find the process of getting all the paperwork and approval for that site becomes a 9-month process as well. And maybe during that 9-month period, you're dealing with illegal miners who are on the site, and you're trying to make sure you have the paperwork, you can negotiate properly with these people from a legal point of view, and the processes just are eating up the time. So all sorts of restrictions. Sorry, I see Wiz are coming in, and I feel like someone's bleeding down my neck for time.
We have about 4 minutes left. I want to give Melvyn an opportunity to jump in, and then just some closing remarks. Melvyn, you might be muted.
Very good point. Actually, wasn't muted. I was welcoming Wizard to the conversation, but I think something just to speak to, I think some of the challenges, at least I've experienced, I think what is true about technically hard businesses, and I think whether it is building infrastructure before a property project or building out IP for, let's say, a cell phone device, or even just processing facility, let's say manufacturing, is the amount of time until you actually see cash flow, because you have to invest up front, both in time, regulatory, and everything else. And so I think for me, it's more so that capital piece, where I feel as though some of the key pieces are often missing. And so I think about our company now. So we recently raised $40 million led by Microsoft, Salesforce, and the early founders or the early investors in Amazon. And that was out of our US entity. And I think definitely what you find in the African context is that the businesses still require the same amount of capital, but the depth of capital markets isn't necessarily there to support you in that particular way. And so I think definitely when you think about building big things on the continent, thinking through how are you able to leverage both your experience, networks, and exposure to unlock capital abroad. And I think, look, many of the people on this panel spoke about studying in other countries, for example, having worked in other countries. And so I think it's that ability to be able to leverage those particular networks and ecosystems to address that particular point. And I think it's nothing unique to tech or unique to now. I mean, I was reading a book the other day, The Economic Development of Southern Africa, which essentially speaks to how mining was built across the continent, focusing on Anglo-American Ernest Oppenheimer, the founder there. And so he began Anglo when he was 37 years old to be a global billion-dollar titan that it is today. But the key thing that unlocked the value for him was the ability for him to go to the US and get capital from JP Morgan and his team. That's where he was Anglo and the American was American. I think it's important for us not to forget that also in our ambition, it's important to think through how we unlock the capital to succeed. And I found that to be a challenge, particularly thought about our business, more specifically at Go One.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, all of you, for attending this session. I really, really appreciate it. I have probably 10 more questions that I didn't even get to. And then I have panel-specific questions I wish I could have gotten to. But maybe I'll close with some remarks from some of the discussion taking place in the chat. Someone said that, maybe we can make corruption more personal to the masses. I think that's one that I think is a point we can take away and see what we can do something about. How can we personalize corruption to people who aren't necessarily feeling it, but to say that, hey, you could have had a job today were it not for, the politician you elected getting in the way of us opening our factory. Those types of conversations, I think, are important to be having as well. But I want to close and just thank you all. Munya, Melvyn, Curtis, Mumamba, thank you so much for attending. And thank you for all of those that joined us for this conversation. The LinkedIn profiles for each of the panelists is available and I encourage you to connect with them and follow them. Thanks, guys, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much.
Session. All right, for all the attendees, we're about to head on over to the next session. The next session is about building the future of Africa. We're going to be joined by Simunza Muyangana, Ori Okolo, Paris Bosire, and Ian E. Aboedi. So let's leave this session and head on over to the next one, and we can take it all from there. Please feel free to drop your contact details in the chats for either the event or the session, and then we can pick it up. And thank you so much, gentlemen, for making the time. We were supposed to be joined by Funke Opeke, CEO of Main One, but unfortunately she was not able to make it. So hopefully this will be the only man along the event.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Cheers. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Cheers.